So welcome to everyone who's listening in, and welcome to these amazing panelists who I'll introduce in just a moment. I'm Eva Goldborn. I'm the CEO and founder of Littlefoot Ventures, which is a food systems and sustainability consultancy with a special focus on philanthropic advising. And so I have the great pleasure today of moderating and guiding this conversation for a client, AmpleHarvest.org, and several of its incredible current and former board members to talk about the power of food recovery in both a food waste solution, a community development solution, and of course a nutrition solution. And in this particular context, while the rest of the world may be talking about the big sort of COP28 food systems transformation at a global level and all the work that's happening at a 40,000 foot level, we are sort of going to keep it very, very focused on our very own backyards. So a lot of the conversations we're going to be having today couldn't be more local. If you think about it in terms of sharing the work that AmpleHarvest.org does. So I'm joined by Gary Oppenheimer, the man, the myth, the legend, and the executive director and founder of AmpleHarvest.org, Mike Sutterer, who's the CEO of Bonnie Plants and also part of the AmpleHarvest.org board, Wendy Gonzalez, who is the chairwoman of the AmpleHarvest.org board. Welcome, Wendy. And David Sank, who is a former board member of AmpleHarvest.org and now with Long Island Food Bank. So we've got a little bit of some founder perspective, some corporate perspective, some technology perspective, and food recovery perspective for us to have what I know will be a really great conversation today. So with that, maybe just to give a few housekeeping notes. The conversation is about 1 hour, so we've got 55 minutes to go. To all of my participants who are listening in, I would love for you to be able to share any questions or thoughts, perspectives that you have either in the Q&A section and or in the chat. And if you haven't already, welcome our participants as well to share where you're listening in from and your organization and a little information about you as well. So first part, about 40 minutes spending in this conversation together on this virtual panel. And then, yeah, hoping that we can open it up for some thoughts and questions from those who are joining us virtually from other parts. How does that sound for my panelists? Are we ready to rock?
Let's do it.
Um, so we'll start off easy because I think it's important for us to orient those who are listening in about who AmpleHarvest.org is, what the organization does. So, Gary, why don't we start with you, and would love for you to share just a little bit about like what is the organization and what's some of the magic that AmpleHarvest.org brings to the food recovery space.
All right, Eva, thank you. I want to thank both the panelists and everybody who's joining us. Thank you very much for taking the time. I created AmpleHarvest.org because I hate waste. That's fundamental. I think most of us do. I hate missed opportunities and I solve problems. I've experienced food waste in my own garden in the past, and this is an outgrowth of what was a local program in my town in northern New Jersey. I very quickly want to say what makes this a unique program, distinct from pretty much any other program you've heard of. And I'm going to take you to another space. We all think about Uber and Lyft as a transportation company. We use it to get places, but I would make the argument it's not a transportation company. They're information companies. They basically they use information to connect a driver and a vehicle to a passenger who wants a ride and to bring them together. And that's where the transportation takes place. AmpleHarvest.org itself isn't a food program. It's actually an information nonprofit that's connecting a gardener who's harvested more than they can use or preserve with share with friends, and enables them to donate that food to a food pantry in their own community, and to do that for year after year after year without us ever touching the food. So we have no logistics, no hands-on involvement. We just connect the dots and then we get out of the picture. And that's unique in this entire space. So again, thank you everybody for joining us.
That's great, Gary. And I think that's a great visual too. And we'll talk in a moment as well about, given the fact that your organization doesn't actually touch and manage the food, some of both the challenges and opportunities in being a service provider within that ecosystem, where you're not taking that traditional role of either logistics or, cold supply chain or, the actual food pantry itself. So thank you. Wendy, let's go to you first. Would love to get your perspectives on what drew you to AmpleHarvest.org and what you think is really exciting and unique about this approach and what you think the opportunity is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for hosting, Eva. So I was first introduced to AmpleHarvest.org via my professional capacity, creating Google's economic impact report, and AmpleHarvest.org is a Google Ad Grants recipient. So in learning and cultivating the story of how they've used those ad grants to help market the nonprofit, I was just really struck by this is just common sense. Like, yes, of course, there's this naturally occurring surplus of produce, and as someone who isn't a gardener, had some tomato plants when I was a kid situation, but you have so many gardeners, both home gardeners and community gardeners across the country. There's this naturally occurring surplus, and you have people who are food insecure. You have folks who are dealing with issues of malnutrition, and they are coexisting in the same communities. And the only thing that is stopping this surplus from reaching those people who could use it most is the lack of information that, one, you can donate fresh food, since I think we were all brought up with the understanding that you had to donate dry goods or canned goods. And then two, to know where to bring that and how to do that. So I was just struck by the simplicity, and I love, much like Gary, I hate waste, and I like finding problems or finding solutions to problems, especially if they're very, very simple. And so that's what really struck me. And through that process, and then it was almost 10 years ago, Gary and I have stayed in touch and worked together on how do we help to amplify AmpleHarvest.org and make this something that everybody starts to feel like is just second nature if you have a garden.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. And I think that emphasis too on that misperception of only being able to donate, shelf stable things that aren't produce, that aren't fresh, but things that are shelf stable, and realizing just how important this opportunity is. Mike, going to you similarly, what attracted you to AmpleHarvest.org, and what are you excited about for this organization moving forward?
Yeah, thanks, Ava. I appreciate you hosting. Bonnie Plants, we're the largest producer and supplier of home vegetable and herb plants for home gardens in the U.S. So every Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, pretty much anywhere where you can buy plants for home gardens, you'll find Bonnie Plants. And our mission is enhancing people's lives through the power of plants. That mission was really articulated by our founder, Bonnie. There was a Bonnie 106 years ago. And it was important to her to set aside vegetable harvest to donate directly to those in her local community who needed it most. So fast forward to the pandemic and 2020, and I saw shortly after kind of the world went on lockdown, giant lines at food banks and food pantries, a huge acute need, and what a perfect opportunity for us as a company and all of our associates and all of the gardeners that we have throughout the country to come in and help and be part of the solution. And so that's really how, we got connected to AmpleHarvest.org. And it really harkens a little bit back to even kind of what happened in World War II with victory gardens and just home gardeners being part of the solution to a food problem. And I liked exactly what Wendy articulated. It is a really simple solution to a complex problem. Every home gardener has excess harvest, more tomatoes, more cucumbers, more zucchini than they know what to do with. And there's an acute need right down the road from their garden every single day. So if we can help create that linkage and create that awareness and keep them doing it year after year after year, it's a great way to make an impact on a big problem.
That's great, Mike. Thank you. And I'll look forward later in the conversation to talking a little bit more about the partnership between AmpleHarvest.org and Bunny Plants, because I think it, in some ways, is certainly a match made in heaven. And I think it's important for people to sort of understand that funding relationship and how the partnership that you've created is pretty unique, sort of blending both the employee engagement components, the cause marketing components, and more traditional sort of corporate philanthropy relationship. So thank you for being part of this conversation. Last but certainly not least, David, you have retired from your role officially within AmpleHarvest.org, but would love to have you share a little bit, similar to the rest of our colleagues here, what initially got you excited about the organization, and now that even you continue to work in the food recovery space, what you continue to see the opportunity to be for it.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, thank you, Eva. Appreciate the intro and having me here today. I was attracted to the technology and to Gary, and I met Gary a number of years ago. Worked on a project with him. Sat on the board for a couple of years. Was volunteering at food banks, and here I am as the chief supply chain officer at Island Harvest Food Bank on Long Island. It's almost an echo of what, several others have said. It's really about the technology and the untapped resource. Home gardens are ubiquitous. And I think when Gary thought about this idea a number of years ago, one of the biggest problems, I'm a home gardener, one of the biggest problems I have every summer is, what do I do with all these vegetables? Because you buy extra plants, you grow a lot, the same crops come in at the same time. So first you have your cucumbers, then your tomatoes, et cetera, and you can't give enough away. So I think just this technology is really what's always been so exciting to me, of giving the home gardener something to do with that fresh produce. But more importantly, it's really going to our neighbors in need. And now being someone who's connected with our neighbors in need every day, as chief supply chain officer at a food bank, we distributed 16 million pounds of food last year. It's still not enough for Long Island. We're increasing this year, and I know that is still not enough. So any additional resources we have are very much welcome, particularly when they are a fresh product that we can get out to our neighbors.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I think that is important to emphasize too, where we have this completely solvable problem and this phenomenon of having a huge population in the United States of those who are food insecure, about 1 in 7 or 1 in 8, I think, depending on sort of how you look at the numbers these days. Astronomical food insecurity for people, majority of which in that stat are children. And then we have surplus coming out of all parts of our food system, and in this case, in backyard gardens. So I think just also emphasizing that extraordinarily unnecessary disconnect that we have between food security and this nutritious food, to me, is what's exciting about sort of making sure that an organization like this continues to thrive and grow, because it's such a simple solution to a problem that we can all agree is completely unnecessary. As we move through this conversation, maybe back to you, Gary, for a question around, especially for nonprofits, in conversations with potential partners or potential funders. There's always conversations around success stories and success metrics. Can you share a little bit about sort of how the organization either tracks this, or how you sort of confirm and guarantee for yourself, okay, we are definitely making an impact, especially given you've been doing this work for quite a long time now, 14 years in the backyard gardener biz. Would love to hear sort of the opportunities and challenges within sharing those success stories.
Thank you. The important thing to remember is this isn't about the food. It's about the connection between the gardener and the food pantry. So since we don't see the food that comes in, we don't see how often it comes in or what it is, our focus is on how many pantries and how many communities have we actually reached. We know that 4 out of 5 gardeners, given the opportunity, want to donate the food. And by the way, we've been speaking about gardeners, but pre-pandemic, America had 42 million gardeners. My understanding from the folks at Bonnie Plants was during the pandemic, it skyrocketed to 62, and it may throttle back a little bit, but we have tens of millions more gardeners now than we ever had. So the numbers I'm about to give you is pre-pandemic. We're about to do a new survey to learn what the new numbers are. But before the pandemic, and this was with the help of a Harvard-trained economist who analyzed all the numbers, we gardeners were growing 11.4 billion pounds of surplus a year. That's enough to feed 28 million people. And I'm going to throw one just massive number, and that is that according to this economist, if every gardener in America knew they could donate, and if every food pantry in America was connected, in other words, the end game, America's healthcare costs would drop $58 billion a year. So we look at the data collected in surveys, the sampling, and we then hand it off to people who are a lot smarter than us outside to do the number crunching and then to come back on what that is. But we've also had accolades. We've had Michelle Obama wrote and spoke about us. Vince Cerf, the father of the internet at Google, has been hugely helpful. Mariah Carey spent time helping to promote AmpleHarvest.org. We're working with about 25% of America's food pantries right now, and across all 50 states and 4,200 communities. And this is all done with a team of 6 people. So it speaks to the efficacy and the impact of how a small program working smartly can actually create a huge amount of impact. The one other thing I want to add, and this is something I couldn't really say during the pandemic, but the program was viral. When a gardener learns that they can donate food to a food pantry, while their problem of not knowing they could donate and to where to donate is solved, they then tend to tell their neighbors over the picket fence or maybe their family across town or across the country about donating food. There's a spread of information across America, across the gardening community, that the solution to hunger is in your backyard. So while it's hard to come up with hard numbers that say this many billions of pounds this year or this many tomatoes were donated, you can see both in the impact of the surveys we get from gardeners and surveys done by partners like Bonnie Plants to see the growth of the impact on the well-being of the communities and the country as a whole.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. And I think that's helpful and important to emphasize too. In the nonprofit world, we can sometimes have a pretty restrictive and binary look into the, required reporting of the impacts of our work. Yet, obviously, so many nonprofits don't work within that, perfectly black and white framework. So I think it's really important to emphasize that as a really great example of the positive impact that your organization is doing that may be sort of out of the norm in terms of some of that traditional nonprofit reporting, which can, be a snag for a lot of organizations. Wendy, I want to turn it back to you for a second on the role of technology in this, pretty simple solution. Would love to just hear from you about how the organization is streamlining this process. And is there an opportunity for Ample Harvest to do more as they sort of look to, additional chapters for the organization moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to echo, I think what everyone has touched upon, the beauty of the organization is in the simplicity of the technology and in that information connection. I think where it has been very interesting to see sort of the growth of the organization over the years is that the core technology, with some modifications, but the core technology has remained consistent, and it's simple. It's easy for someone to come to the website to find a food pantry near them, find the information they need, and that's it. It's an in and out sort of situation. The challenge remains always that the information is what people need, and so it needs to be accurate. And especially through COVID, of course, there were challenges around what food pantries were still open, what their hours were, all of that. So the organization, that continues to be where a lot of the continued focus is on, is how do we make sure that this information is accurate, and how do we also continue to expand into new communities. As Gary mentioned, right now in the database we have 25% of American food pantries, so there's massive room for growth, while we also continue to maintain and update all of those food pantries that are already part of the database. So in terms of technology and where I think it can play an increased role in the next couple of years is obviously in the big buzzword of 2023 with AI. Where does AI fit into this to help find additional food pantries that are not part of the database, to help with this pretty laborious task of making sure the information is accurate and updated. And then what else? What other information would be really important in terms of even data gathering? So as we talked about, we aren't, the organization isn't touching the food itself, but it would be great if we had more insight into the amount and types of foods that are being donated. It would be great if we could continue to provide really accurate information to gardeners from a local perspective about what produce flourishes and at what times. Can we help gardeners to increase their yield so there's even more for them to donate? I mean, sky's the limit. There's so much more that can be done here. And I think technology, and particularly AI, it'll be interesting to see where the organization uses those more advanced tools in the next few years.
I love that. As somebody who's equally terrified and excited by the applications of AI, I think especially in the nonprofit world too, when resources are extremely limited, team members are extremely limited. I think that's a great point of just emphasizing how to use something like that to be able to be a cost saver and time saver, especially when the organization relies so heavily on databases and information. Building on that, though, Gary, I'm curious if you want to share a little bit about some of the upcoming work that the organization has to access some of these additional communities, because, and this was one thing that sort of struck me in working with the team when I was thinking about, the just simply the directions to or the address of a lot of these places. In my mind, I'm like, okay, well, obviously there's like a number and a road and a city and a zip code for everywhere in the United States, right? And then, of course, realizing that there's so many rural parts of our country, and in particular, indigenous communities on reservations. And that sort of was, to me, a really important light bulb moment of like, oh, there's this whole other community of people that we are not accessing right now. How are we going to do that?
Yeah, I was bothered by something for years when I looked at our national impact map, all the dots on the map that show where an AmpleHarvest.org member food pantry is. I was seeing large gaps. Now, we treated New York and New Mexico exactly the same. It was a spaghetti on the wall approach of getting food pantries. And we know that there's hunger in every county in America. Therefore, there are food pantries in every county in America. But why was I seeing large swaths of the center of the country with few, if any, food pantries? And it really bothered me. And I've been a decade-long friend of Chief Henry Red Cloud, who's Lakota from the Pine Ridge Reservation. And I've gone to him many times. And Henry and I sat down, we looked at this, and we said, what's going on? I looked at different things like groundwater and are there gardeners? There are gardeners across America. That wasn't it. The need was there, the opportunity was there, and AmpleHarvest.org wasn't. And that bothered me. With the help of Chief Henry Red Cloud, other tribal elders, and indigenous food sovereignty experts, we realized, this is over the past 2-year period, that we were missing the boat a little bit. And it turned out that the model of AmpleHarvest.org that works so well in any community in America, I thought, didn't exactly work right on Native American reservations. There were a couple of, and this is an important thing because Native Americans, according to the National Gardening Association, do more gardening per capita than any other segment of the American population. And we know that there are major nutrition and hunger problems. So the opportunity and the need was huge. What was wrong? We spent time doing research and we learned that number one, the food pantry model in some tribal communities was different than what it is in the rest of the country. We need for AmpleHarvest.org food pantries to be nonprofits and give food away for free. That's our requirement. Tribal communities, that is the case in some food pantries, but there are other food pantries that are a couple of shelves in the back of a hardware store. Or it may be run by a tribal government. We had to make changes in our model. We also learned that there were places across the country, like the Navajo Nation, the largest reservation in the country, where there are no street addresses. And I can't send a gardener using Google Maps to a food pantry if I don't have an address to which to send them. So we partnered with another organization called What Three Words, which gave us free use of their great technology. So now, even if you're in a community that doesn't have a food a street address is, I can get the gardener to where the food pantry is. We also have communities, as you've probably heard, where the internet infrastructure is very limited. And while the government's working to fix that, it's still limited. And also there are places across America where there's no zip code. We had to make all the changes. But the other thing we also had to do is pivot on dealing with cultural considerations. We brought in tribal experts. We've actually brought in now a staffer who herself is Native American. And we're now rolling out a program called AmpleHarvest.org in Indian country to enable what has worked in the rest of the country to work at least as well, if not better, in tribal communities. And I'll add one more thing to that. The piece of code that is enabling us to get a gardener to a food pantry on an unnamed street down the road will enable us to get a gardener to the right door of a massive cathedral or church where the food pantry is. Because right now they'll just show up at the front door of a church, for example, where the food pantry may be in the back. We'll be able to get them to within 10 feet of where they're supposed to be. So this problem that we found and the solution that we found will allow us to go back and fix a problem of getting gardeners, making the gardener experience even better than it's been in the past.
That's great. And thanks for that. And I think that is a good example too of the opportunity and sort of evolution of the use of technology for AmpleHarvest.org moving forward. And in particular, to be able to ensure that there's that degree of cultural consideration and accessibility for Indigenous communities and those who are, not within the standard framework that we're used to. David, I think I'm going to toss it to you for a quick second as well from the food pantry perspective. One, how do organizations like AmpleHarvest.org contribute to and sort of within the food pantry network? And in turn, where, given your positioning within the food pantry world, what more can be done? What else could be done better in terms of ensuring that we're getting food to people that's not only the appropriate amount, but that it's nutritious? Again, sort of as this conversation focuses around produce, to me, I think that that's really fascinating and really important to emphasize.
Yeah. I almost want to turn the first part of that question from, what can the food pantry world do to help Ample
Oh,
Harvest?
yes. And sorry, that was like 14 questions in one.
No, but that's
take what you want.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll try to respond to the question.
Right.
But it's really what Ample Harvest has done to help the food pantry world. And again, I operated a food bank. A food bank supports food pantries. So here on Long Island, we have 300 pantries that we support. And people are always, confusing a food bank with a food pantry. Think of a food bank as a distributor. We're nonprofit. We're part of that entire nonprofit system. But a food pantry, a small food pantry, cannot have tractor trailer loads back up to their door to bring them the right product. So, so we're in that supply chain, if you will. But getting back to
for correcting me on that too, because I think that is actually really important to clarify and make sure that people do understand it's not just a nuance, but it's actually a pretty specific, different positioning that food banks have versus food pantries. So thank you.
I'm just going to add one quick thing to that. There's 200 food banks in this country, 200. And just as an example, as one food bank, I'm servicing 300 pantries. So if you assume every food bank is doing that same number, you can see that you need the food banks again to be kind of that distribution network to get the food to the right locations. But getting back to your question, to me, one of the things that's most important is the work that we do is guided by nutrition policy. And I think Wendy brought it up earlier that, historically, we were all brought up thinking you have to bring in shelf-stable food. If we think about our neighbors in need or the people who need food, many of them don't have access to fresh food. Many of them have high incidence of heart disease, of diabetes, various other diseases that really their health outcomes could be improved upon by getting more unprocessed, fresh foods. So getting fresh produce and other fresh items, dairy, some protein items to the community is critically important. So the role that Ample Harvest is playing by finding all of that excess fresh produce and getting that to our neighbors in need, it just really helps out the entire supply chain of what we're trying to achieve. To just throw another number at it, we as I mentioned, we're guided by nutrition guidelines. And so my goal each year is to have 30% of the pounds of food that I distribute be just fresh produce. Okay, I'm distributing 16 million pounds of food a year, 30 million pounds. I'm sorry, 30% of that should be fresh produce. Let's call that 5 million pounds almost of just fresh produce that we are trying to get to the Long Island community. Anything that Ample Harvest can do to help us continue to increase that, critically important. So I think that's what they've been able to do to help us out. What we can do to help Ample Harvest, it's really continuing to help Ample Harvest connect to the pantries in our area, make sure that all of them are all the pantries are listed on Ample Harvest, making referrals when we do get backyard gardeners. Many of them are not in the proximity of my food bank, and so that they don't have to transport food to me. They can bring it right to a pantry in their area. We do what we can to help connect gardeners that do contact us and say, hey, can we drop off there? We connect them to a pantry, but then we also introduce them to Ample Harvest.
I love that. And
well, your question, I mean, there was a few parts there, like you said.
Yeah, no, I know that I gave you a tricky one, but I'm glad that you took it where it needed to go. I'm curious too.
Eva, can I just say one thing quickly, by the way?
Sure.
David represents one of those 200 food banks. We work with the entire Feeding America Food Bank network, including Feeding America itself. So we're part of a much larger piece. David's representing 1/200th of that, but we've been working since day one with the entire network.
Yeah, which I think goes to sort of the efficiency of the organization. And what I'm hearing too is like clearly more work needs to be done in terms of the awareness and education of these different stakeholders, both on the food bank, food pantry side, our gardeners, making sure that we're dispelling any confusion about what can be donated, and to where it can be donated as well. So I think that that's also important to emphasize. David, one clarifying question too, out of curiosity, you said 30% of the food that you donate, you're trying to ensure is fresh. How easy or difficult has that been for you to do in your particular work?
Okay, and to clarify, that 30% is just fresh produce alone. So I go for about 12% animal protein and 10% dairy.
Okay,
also.
okay, good.
As far as difficulty, since the pandemic, it's been easier because there's been more money involved, particularly state money that helps me acquire New York State produce, and many other states have put similar policies in place. And it goes back to the pandemic where they were trying to connect the farmers who were having difficulty. If you remember all the milk that was being spilled, et cetera. Many of the states picked up on that and made the connections, and those connections have stayed since the pandemic, which is just phenomenal. That it's taken, there's backyard gardeners that have excess. There are farmers that have excess, gleaning on farms, and just finding other ways to get everything off a farm at the end of the season is something that is critically important. How easy has it been? I'd say pre-pandemic, it was more difficult because it really comes down to the budgets that we have. And once again, fortunately, the budget, I have a greater budget now because of some of the things that the states are doing. The other thing that has not really come out of the pandemic, but it's been some laws that have come into effect since then, which are recycling laws within the states. And New York gets passed, it's in California. I think it's up and down the West Coast. Massachusetts is on the verge of having something pass. Many states now are looking at how much food organizations can dispose of, how much organic waste they can dispose of. And there's a very small percentage that they can dispose of. So think of all your retail locations, all your food service outlets, your food distributors, et cetera. When they can only dispose of 2 to 5% in the waste stream, that means 95% of what they can't use, they are legally required to donate, which has been phenomenal. So that's what's made it a little bit easier for us also.
Yeah, that's huge. And thanks for outlining that too, because that helps us see how the policy ecosystem and that enabling environment from policy, even though it's, restrictive to some degree for the retailers or the restaurants, food service operators, it starts to get them thinking about the fact that, oh, this food actually is valuable. We thought it was easier to trash this, and now the realization that, oh my God, there was so much that we could have been donating. And I think that that's really just a positive unintended consequence of, good organics management, and also a good unintended consequence of, if anything good has come out of COVID, this realization that, how precarious our food system is, which,
Eva, one quick thing.
yeah,
I know I've had a lot of time, but just one
I
quick
don't know.
thing. One other quick statistic for me. Last year, we rescued from Long Island retail, stores. So whether that's your Stop and Shops, Targets, Walmarts, BJ's, Lidl, Trader Joe's, et cetera, 6 million pounds of food. In 12 months, we rescued 6 million pounds of food.
Which
I
is
just want to leave you with that.
Yeah,
So,
no, I appreciate that, just really
yeah,
emphasizing the scope and scale of this.
yes.
Mike, I want to turn it to you for a second and I am fascinated by the partnership that you and Bonnie Plants has with AmpleHarvest.org. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the specifics of this relationship, because as we look at financial sustainability of these organizations, the relationship with the funder needs to, I would argue, be different than it used to be. Just writing the check to the nonprofit and hoping for the best is sort of a way of the past, and much more strategic partnerships that include financial contributions, but also something deeper, where there's clearly this sort of co-benefit for the corporate philanthropy entity and the nonprofit. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more about what you see as the exciting opportunity for AmpleHarvest.org, and in particular also how it touches on your employee engagement and the work that you do to get your own employees excited about contributing within their own communities.
Yeah, appreciate that. So yes, I mean, one of the great things about this partnership, as I mentioned in the very opening, is it's really well aligned with who we are as a company and what our overall company mission is. And we view it as inextricably linked to kind of our success and path going forward. This isn't a kind of one and done or sort of cause marketing only approach. When we talk about this, and we have our own philanthropic arm, Bonnie Plants Foundation, which is also a 501c3, AmpleHarvest.org is the foundational partner of our philanthropic activity. And we talk about it not just as, hey, this is something that we write checks to, and it's only going to be something that we do for the next couple of years until we find the next thing. We're talking about it in terms of a decades-long partnership, and really viewing it through that lens. And our role, here, I think is, there's three components of it that we view. One is, yes, money's important, right? An organization like AmpleHarvest.org is a very scrappy organization, as was mentioned, serving a very important role, and organizations like this need money. So that's where corporations like us can stand in and help. Two is, we've got a giant megaphone in with the people who are going to be doing the most to help sort of advance the mission and the cause here, because we have that connection to gardeners, the home gardener, and we can speak directly to them. And we have a connection to large retail partners like Home Depot and others. And in fact, Home Depot, one of the very first partners we sort of brought in together is Home Depot, and using their social media platforms, their media platforms, and their stores to really help tell the story directly to home gardeners who are shopping the Home Depots as well, and helping them create that awareness, which is really what we can do. Is, to the points that have been made, a lot of home gardeners don't understand what they can do with their excess harvest. They don't understand that they can take them to their local food pantries. That's a huge opportunity for us. We actually have, we make over 300 million actually consumer impressions every single year. So we're touching almost the entire United States with messages to help raise awareness. And the great thing about it is, we're actually seeing the impact And it's not just that we're seeing more gardeners donate to local food pantries, which they are, but what's really exciting is 60%. We did a survey in 2022, 60% of the people who did it, who were donating their surplus harvest, were doing it for the very first time. So we are making an impact to create that awareness. And it's a lot of younger gardeners who we're seeing do it as well. And what's exciting to me about that is, as they're coming into the category, we might as well train them that part of what you do as a gardener every year when you harvest your tomatoes and your cucumbers is you donate to your local food pantry. And then it just becomes something that they're going to do for the 20, 30, 40 years that they're a home gardener as well. And then the last thing, which you kind of touched on is, our associates. Bonnie has 4,000 associates across the country. We have greenhouse facilities that grow these plants in almost every state. And our associates are very bought in and very much engaged in supporting AmpleHarvest.org and the mission. In fact, so much so that our associates actually will take harvest from their own gardens and additionally plant gardens at our facilities specifically to donate to local food pantries in their area. And we've actually, over the past 3 years, donated over 30 tons of fresh produce just from Bonnie Plant's associates and facilities directly to local food pantries. And we have 4,000 advocates out there as well. They are also telling their friends and neighbors and family members in communities to go to AmpleHarvest.org to check out where they can, donate their local harvest as well. So it really is a very deep partnership that spans a lot of different levels for us. And I think, plays a role to sort of not only help advance the mission of AmpleHarvest.org, but it really reinforces and is linked so tightly to our company mission as well, which is what makes it such a great partnership.
I love that, Mike, and thank you for sort of taking us through all the different levels of that, because the fact that you have access and touch on messaging to the consumer, the home gardener on one side, with retail partners, but then also your 4,000 associates, I think also really speaks to this moment and almost this cultural shift that's happening. Gen Z and millennials are starting to, sort of overtake the market in terms of our consumption. And all studies and research have started to show just the, impossible, well, not impossible, but a really high desire for aligning with a values-driven company in the way where they're putting their dollars. They feel that they represent a certain set of values. They want every company or organization that they interact with, from where they're buying their plants to where they're buying their boots, to be aligned with their vision. And I think that the work that you're doing is a really strong example of where that can continue to go, because the consumer, I imagine, is also the associate. I mean, we're talking about sort of this entirely new generational shift, and they're not in, disparate parts of the supply chain, but they sort of both embody that different type of thinking and that cultural shift. To sort of pivot us a little bit, so thank you so far. I want to pivot us to a little bit of popcorn here, sort of whoever is moved looking at the challenges and solutions for AmpleHarvest.org moving forward. And we sort of spoke a little bit about this already, but what have been some of the challenges in connecting to those stakeholder groups? So with connecting to our gardeners, connecting with our food banks. So just speaking a little bit to that, and how the organization has or plans to overcome that. along the way in the journey of making sure that the messaging is really out there about this opportunity for donation.
Let me start for a minute by saying that almost from day one, in terms of reaching the gardening community, Google has been a massively helpful and critical partner in terms of the Google ad grants that Wendy talked about. To this day, now almost 15 years later, Google is still giving us the opportunity to reach the gardening community as a whole, which so thank you, Google. But also the partnerships with Bonnie Plants and Home Depot, for example, helping that reach even more people there. One of the things, by the way, I did want to bring up, and I had forgotten to mention, one of the pieces that AmpleHarvest.org brought to the hunger, food waste, food bank system that no one has ever done before, which has been critical to the success, has been just-in-time inventory logic. A food pantry does not need refrigeration and storage to receive the food because we guide the gardener to the day of week and time of day of donation hours before the food is distributed at the food pantry. So the food goes from the garden to the food pantry to a hungry family's dinner table on a same day basis. So the food pantries don't need costly refrigeration and storage. And I was remiss in not bringing that up before. That's a first in the entire system. And it makes for a very smooth flow of food, enabling the hungry family to get food fresher than you and I can buy in a supermarket.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Thanks for adding that, Gary. Any thoughts from others, sort of with your board hats on, in terms of that challenge of connection and the opportunity to strengthen it over time?
Yeah, I think the core challenge is always finding the right people and getting the message out to them in the right time and building that muscle of donation. So, as Mike was talking about, of getting folks just in that habit that this is what we do. You grow extra produce, you donate that to your local food pantry. So I think the challenge is getting in front of gardeners and prospective gardeners. That's where Bonnie Plants has been just such an incredible partner. And how do you also get in front of food pantries to say you should be a part of this database? Again, we've 25% of America's food pantries. There are a lot more out there. And when you have more available, then there are more gardeners with their extra zucchini who can then find a place to donate. So that's the challenge. It just continues to be what the core challenge, I think, basically was for Gary on day one, continues now because new gardeners come on board, new food pantries come on board. And so I think the building of awareness of AmpleHarvest.org and this idea of home gardeners being able to donate surplus produce, that's the key opportunity that continues to still be ahead of us. I often use the analogy of goodwill. And if I no longer want a sweater or jeans no longer fit, I don't throw them in the trash. I say, here's my goodwill bag, and I hit a certain amount and I go and I take it to my local Goodwill. I don't have to give it a second thought. That is what ideally every person who is a gardener in this country knows to do and becomes absolute second nature. And then the hard part just becomes, okay, great. We just need to make sure that food pantries are updated and all that information is still accurate. Because to Gary's point, one of the other key pieces that really struck me from my first day learning about AmpleHarvest.org until now is that idea of food pantries don't have to require, they don't require refrigeration. And so that's where that barrier of entry has been removed. So that's the goal for me. And there's still a lot of room to get there.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. And I loved when we were talking in our briefing together to your example of goodwill, because when you say that too, it highlights the absurdity of the fact that we treat our old jeans and clothes with a degree of reverence, because of course, like, even if we end up driving around with it in a garbage bag in our car for a month, eventually it will still get to Goodwill. But you'd think too, even the food that you've grown in your backyard, that literally the labor of love, you'd think that you'd want to be able to preserve that even more than those jeans that don't fit anymore. So I think that's a really powerful comparison to help us understand and emphasize we have a long ways to go, but the goal is to have that be completely automatic. We've got the garbage bag of clothes, going in one direction, and then we've got this beautiful basket of zucchini that's going to the local food pantry, and it's just like the way of being, the way that we're sort of operating as, as people. So I love that. Any
The other
thoughts
point I could add,
yeah,
just
sure.
really one other note there. I live in New York City, as I mentioned. I'm not somebody who has a garden, but I want to say that for AmpleHarvest.org, it's still an organization I think that any person can get behind. One, because you probably know quite a few gardeners in your life, and so it's a message that people can help to amplify. But two, I'm also somebody who grew up in Florida, and orange trees were plentiful, and so were lots of oranges just sitting on the ground because a family can literally only eat so many oranges. And I think that is true, of apples, of peaches, of all of our fruit trees. And so the other piece I would add is that there are more people who are home gardeners than maybe realize, because they do have those produce trees or fruit trees in their yards. Same thing to a degree, even with mint plants, or and people who have basil plants that go crazy or whatnot. This is something that I do think that you don't have to be someone who says I have a green thumb and I have this massive garden in my backyard to be somebody who has something that, if they're not going to use it, that doesn't have to just end up in the yard clippings, that can actually be used for good.
And that actually connects to a question that we just got a little bit ago as well, sort of exactly that example where if somebody has an apple tree or an orange tree and they're more than happy to donate, but they may not have the capacity, either physically or otherwise, to be able to harvest it. Is there an opportunity for AmpleHarvest.org to play a role sort of within that ecosystem, or how is that challenge looked at from the organization?
Yeah, let me answer that. We don't have gleaners, which is people going out to people's backyards. And what they may want to do is contact one of our partner organizations, the Society of St. Andrews, which does do gleaning around the country. But that isn't what Wendy brought up, by the way, is a really important piece. I actually call those people who bought a house with an orange tree accidental gardeners. They didn't plant a tree, but they got it. We'd love to partner with the real estate industry so that when you buy a house, the broker not only tells you how many bathrooms and how many cars go in the garage, but that you have trees, apple trees or cherry trees or grapefruit trees, whatever. And by the way, here's an organization that will help you or enable you to donate that surplus to a food pantry. I was one of those people. My home's in northern New Jersey. I bought my house. I didn't know when I bought it that I had an apple tree. The following year, I had all these apples coming down, and this is obviously pre-AmpleHarvest.org. So the fact that you bought a house with those fruit trees or fruit bushes is a wonderful opportunity, even if you don't have dirt under your fingernails like a gardener, to still take that food and to donate it. And by the way, you don't really need somebody to harvest the stuff. If you wait long enough, it'll come raining down on you. You can just pick it up and donate it.
That's a good point. Thank you, Gary. And I think that's helpful too for people to understand sort of the places where AmpleHarvest.org operates and the ones that they don't within this space. We have David or Mike, any thoughts from you on this one before I close us out with sort of a question looking towards the future?
I would just say, I guess, related to the last couple of comments there. I mean, to me, part of the beauty of AmpleHarvest.org and the mission is it is simply it connects that person who has a surplus harvest with the local food pantry, and then gets the heck out of the way. And I think that's to me part of the beauty of it, and part of what makes it such a great solution is it's not trying to be anything more than it needs to be, which is, Gary opened up saying it's kind of like Uber, right? You need to connect the car and the driver with the person who needs to get someplace. And that to me is the beauty of this. And as a board, we talk about that a lot, and Gary does a great job of keeping us back focused on that's kind of the mission. And we got plenty to do within that mission without creeping, more broad beyond that.
Thank you. And I think that's a really good point too, of just the surgical precision in focus that the organization has, which I agree there's a lot of power in that. Rounding us out at the end of this conversation and looking towards the future for AmpleHarvest.org, what's next? What is this group excited about for the organization and for funders or potential partners, collaborators who are listening into this conversation? What do we want them to know about where the organization is going and what it may need to support it in its longevity?
We're going to keep on doing what we've been doing to bring America's 62 million gardeners to the local food pantry and to help them learn that the solution to hunger is in their backyard. And I want to add to that, there are millions of Americans who themselves have fallen in economic hard times and go to a food pantry to get bread and milk and cheese, but they're also a gardener. This is that rare opportunity where somebody who is in need is able to donate their surplus to that food pantry. So they're not just asking for help from the community, but they're contributing to the community to help their neighbors in need. This is an amazing community building opportunity for the entire nation. It's very much a local program, but on a national scale. So we're always looking for philanthropic partners and corporate partners that want to step up to help America become healthier, help the people and the planet basically come together and enable it's become basically a country in which hunger is reduced and malnutrition, of course, and diet-related diseases are reduced at zero cost to the community or the country. And any partners want to reach out, we'd love to talk with you.
That's great, Gary. Others want to chime in on that?
I would echo my excitement at that continued mission. And I think that there is, as I mentioned, how do we make AmpleHarvest.org that mechanism like a goodwill? And that to me, I think is so powerful. I love the idea of the lasting impact that this organization can have if that really is a muscle that every American learns. And I think that's the ambition here, is that this becomes kind of the fabric of what individuals in this country do. And of course, globally, anyone could look at this model and say, okay, I hadn't thought about that, but yep, I've got a garden and I can give too. So that's the opportunity ahead of us. And as Gary echoed, we'd love, any partners who can come in and say, hey, I have an idea or I have a way to help amplify this message. We're all ears.
I love that. Mike, David?
I'd say, as someone representing 200 food banks around the country, anybody who can help us, or any organization that can help us identify any excess food that's in this country, and particularly it's in places that we can't reach. I can't reach into backyards. Just from a scale standpoint, I'm getting into the larger retail stores, big food service outlets, et cetera, with manufacturers, distributors. Having AmpleHarvest.org there to help us just find that additional food is incredible, and getting it out to our neighbors in need, it just goes such a long way. And anything that we can do to continue to help them populate that database, it's a self-sustaining a cycle. It really, it's great.
Mike, anything?
Yeah, and I guess I would just add, the beauty of the power of the scale of whether you're a intentional gardener or an accidental gardener, as Gary calls them. I mean, that's a little bit of donation, a little bit of that surplus aggregated together over those millions and millions of people, and you've got billions of pounds of fresh, nutritious food donated that can put a huge dent. It doesn't sound like much on the surface. How much can a home garden really help? But it's staggering when you stack it all up to see the impact that it can have. And that's what's really, really exciting about what AmpleHarvest.org is doing.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you all for this conversation, to just emphasize not only the impact and opportunity that this organization has, but so much opportunity within the food recovery and food waste space right now. I think this is really encouraging. So thank you so much for everyone's time.
Thank you.
Thank you.